Hi everyone, Nicole Hanna here from Nicole Hanna Jewelry and YouTube's Go Art Yourself. Today I'm going to start a little series of beginner wire weaving designs. So we're going to start with the hillside design here, which just uses one weave and multiple coils. Your materials are 3 pieces of 25 centimeter 20 gauge round dead soft wire and 28 gauge round wire, which I did not measure the length, so I just suggest you add as needed. An 8mm round bead and some pliers and some wire cutters. So you're going to hold those 25 centimeter 20 gauge round wires, your base wires, parallel and horizontal with ends even to one another, and with your weaving wire leave a small tail if you need to grip, and begin a coil around all 3 wires about 8 centimeters from the left end of the base wires. And every 5 or 10 coils, use your fingernails, your fingertips to really push the ends of that coil in towards one another, keep it nice and flush, and pinch it with some pliers so that your base wires don't overlap one another or bunch on top of one another. You do have to use a sort of gentle hand when you're pinching the coils because you don't want to mark up your coil or your wires while you're working. And then you want to coil around all 3 wires about 2.5 centimeters. You can count the number of coils if you like, because you will have to repeat that length on the opposite side, but I just eyeballed it. At the end of the coil, bend the top wire up 90 degrees, and then we're going to continue to coil around these 2 wires. Coil about 1.5 centimeters to start. You can add as needed later on. Be sure to pinch that as you go too, and keep it nice and flat and flush. And then add an 8mm bead to your bent base wire, which I'll refer to as the bead base wire. As the wire exits the bead, bend that wire up 90 degrees so that it's parallel to the big coil. And then begin to curve that smaller coil around the bead, adding coils as needed until they reach the bead base wire. Now all 3 wires are parallel to one another again, and we're going to coil around all 3 wires this time, the same length as on the opposite side. Now we're going to push the ends of these 2 coils in towards one another, creating a little teardrop shape. And at the end of each coil, bend the base wires slightly until they no longer overlap one another, but those ends of the coils are still touching one another. And then we're going to coil 5 times, give or take, around all 6 base wires. Careful to keep those base wires from overlapping one another or bunching together. So if you need to, you can use your flat nose pliers again to gently pinch it until all those wires are nice and flat next to each other. The outer right wire, I'm bending all the way down just to move it out of the way. We'll use it later. And the other 3 left wires, I'm bending in the opposite direction. That holds those 5 coils in place. So now on the 2 straight wires, the rightmost straight wire, we're going to coil 3 times. And then we're going to coil 3 times around both those straight wires. And that completes 1 rotation of the 3-3 weave, 3 1-wire coils, as shown here, followed by 3 2-wire coils. So this here completes the 2nd rotation of the 3-3 weave. So you can complete about 5 or 6 rotations of the 3-3 weave to start. We'll add as needed. Bend that weave out to the right, and then create a little counterclockwise loop. By bending it to the right first, you kind of assure that that loop sits centered above the piece. Now we're going to continue to add rotations of the 3-3 weave until they reach the bead base wire as it exits the bead. And you can add as many rotations as you like to get a nice curve, however, whatever shape of a curve or flow you want. Once you have that curve and flow the way you want it, you can trim the weaving wire and set it aside. Now with that remaining right base wire, we're going to create a very small little counterclockwise spiral and then continue to shape this wire along the outside of the 3-3 weave. Just taking a moment to make sure your wires are curving nice and smoothly. I use my pliers quite a bit to pinch those loops and spirals flat, which adds a little more stability to the piece as well. Now with the next right wire, we're going to take your weaving wire, which you've trimmed and set aside, and we're going to create a coil. And you can see that I'm starting the coil at the end of the wire and then pinching that coil so that it's nice and compressed. And once your coil is started, you can trim any tail at the beginning and push that coil all the way to the base of that wire. Then bend the wire along the inside of the 3/3 weave, adding coils as needed to reach that bead base wire. And then once you have that shape and the number of coils that you need, and the curve is nice and you're happy with it, you can trim that weaving wire and set it aside for later use. Then we're going to take the 4 wire ends here and secure them to the 2-wire coil beneath the bead. So we're going to pass it between that 2-wire coil and the bead from front to back, and then bend it around the back of the coil to secure. So I'm starting with the coiled wire first, and then I'm going to secure the ends of the 3/3 weave, and then I'm going to secure the ends of the final bare base wire. It's easier to do just 1 or 2 wires at a time than trying to pass all 4 wire ends through. You can see I'm holding my weaves and wires in place with my thumb on my left hand as I'm securing the ends of those wires. Now at the end of this wire, I'm going to wrap it all the way around the front of that coil beneath the bead, and then I'm going to trim excess and discard. And with my pliers, I'm just going to pinch that trimmed end really flush and tight against the surface of that coil beneath the bead. And that's just some added security so that wire doesn't come unwrapped or unraveled. Now we can trim excess from the remaining 3 wires on this side. You want to leave just enough length to completely grip that coil beneath the bead. So once you've trimmed the wires, you can use your pliers to pinch those wires closed around that coil until you can't see or feel any wire ends from the back. So once you've done your pinching, just take a finger and run it along the back. Make sure you can't feel anything, and then you're good to go. So with the remaining 2 wires, we're going to use the weaving wire that we set aside. You can see I'm just taking a moment to make sure I like the positioning of all my wires and everything's nice and flat, and just pinch here and there gently so you don't mark up your wire to make sure everything's in position. So with the weaving wire, we're going to start a 3/3 weave again. We're going to do about 4.5 rotations, beginning and ending this weave with the coils around a single wire. You can see the coils around a single wire are on the wire furthest away from the bead. So once you've completed your 4.5 rotations, you can trim any tail at the beginning and then curve this bead or this weave over the very first coil that we did, and then pass the ends of the weave through the center of the piece and then wrap it around the back of that coil to secure. Now we're going to start with the weaving wire that's still attached, just because I didn't want to have to deal with wire ends, so I'm leaving the weaving wire attached. I'm going to begin a coil on the base wire that's furthest away from the bead. You see I've spread the wires out a little bit to kind of create a channel through which the weaving wire can pass much more easily. So I coiled about 2.5, 3 centimeters to start, and I'm creating a little clockwise spiral or loop at the top, and then continuing to add coils until I reach the coil beneath the bead. And once I've got the shape and the curvature that I like, I'll trim the weaving wire and discard it. I won't need it anymore. Now with the final base wire, I'm also going to create a little tiny clockwise spiral inside the spiral of the coiled base wire, and then continue to shape that wire down beneath the bead. And then we're going to secure the ends of these 2 wires to that coil beneath the bead, just like we did with the wires on the opposite side. So we're going to pass it between the bead and the coil. You can do one at a time. It is easier. And I'm taking a moment. I didn't like how this wire here was jutting out and away from the coil base wire. So I'm going to take a moment and fiddle with that wire until those two wires are flush against one another. But if you like it like that, by all means, let there be a little bit of shape and volume to the piece. So I'm going to wrap that outer wire there all the way around the front of the coil again, like we did on the opposite side. Trim any excess, and then with your pliers, pinch that trimmed in flush against that coil, nice and tight and secure, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then you can turn the piece over and trim the remaining wire from this base wire and pinch that end closed around the coil as well until you can't feel or see any wire end from the back. And then you can add an ear wire to the curve of that 3-3 weave, or as I did, you can add a 10mm 14 gauge jump ring to act as a bail. And this is your first lesson using just one simple 2-wire weave. There will be many more lessons to come, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.